Okay, so let's start off with something that you might expect to see as a type of quiz question in here. Normally, I would do this in class and hand out a little quiz for you guys, but because I accidentally posted the whole thing, answers and all, we'll just kind of go through it this way. This is what an example of something that I like to do in class with students for chapter 10. Here we are talking about lipids, and I'd say, what's the primary difference between a free fatty acid and a triacylglycerol? Our tags are composed of our free fatty acids. I call them tags. I should call the free fatty acids or something, right? Yeah. But our free fatty acids are just the single carbon chains with that carboxylic acid at one end. Okay? And the triacylglycerols are if you take 3 of those and esterify them to a glycerol backbone, you get the triacylglycerol. So it's really just about how we store them. The free fatty acids are stored as triacylglycerols, and some not really transported as them, but yeah. We'll see this constant cycling between cleaved free fatty acids and triacylglycerols. There's also diacylglycerols and monoacylglycerols as we go through the whole enzymatic process to chop them off and hook them back up. But the free fatty acids are the ones that are actually used for when you start cleaving off 2 carbon units to produce energy in the cell. So if you start burning fat, it's the free fatty acids that you're using, so they're the active metabolized form. Okay. But that really is just kind of to reinforce the very basics in there. I always like this question. I always ask this question. I think I found a way to ask a variation on this question here. But I always used to say, draw a typical phosphoglycerol, phosphoglycerolipid, or phospholipid. And the idea here, this is what I keep forgetting. I need to bring my own pointer in here. And it sticks in here. So use this thing. It's very sad pointer. But we've got basically 4 components here. I used to make this like a 4 or 8 point question. But our one component, here we can see our glycerol, 3 carbon unit with the oxygens on there. We have a phosphate head group. So that's our phospholipid. And we could have something on here. If you put an H in there, I'd be happy, but an X substituent or R, whatever in there. But that's our second component. Our third component, we go all the way to the top to carbon 1. We have a saturated fatty acid on carbon 1. And we typically have an unsaturated fatty acid on carbon 2. So those are our 4 components in there. Okay. If this weren't supposed to be like an in-class quiz, I might add the second part of this question and say, well, how's this different from a sphingolipid? Okay. And our sphingolipid would look very similar because we have something like this here, but sphingolipid has its own tail. Instead of carbon 1, it's got its own long fatty acid looking tail there. And in carbon 2, the cognate to that position on there, there's an amide linked ester for usually a saturated fatty acid. And then, the end of the sphingomyelin looks the same. You still have a phosphate group there with something attached to it. Okay. So that's fairly straightforward. And then if we go for a structure, say, what do we need for our steroid hormone? Something that they all have in common is this steroid ring backbone. Those 4 fused rings, 3 6-membered and 1 5-membered ring. Should put up a picture of, ring D has how many atoms in it? And my daughter just had her 5th birthday, so there's a picture of her going, 5. So let's put that in D. Trying to be topical. Ooh, terrible. All right. But that's our 4 fused rings in there. And what does this mean for a steroid hormone molecule? That they're typically going to have this planar section in here. We can think of this cholesterol has a long tail on it. Most of our hormones do not have that alkyl tail, but we can. Everything is a variation on this nucleus. Okay. Now, in some cases, I think we saw an example on Tuesday about one of the rings. I think ring B or ring C was opened to form a bioactive steroid-derived molecule. I think that was more of a vitamin, less of a hormone, but hormones typically look like this. I'm not going to ask you guys to memorize structures of like estrogen versus, testosterone or anything crazy like that. If you know the structure, that's good enough. This gives us an idea of where we're going. Okay. And it's kind of funny. We won't get to it in Biochem 1, but Biochem 2, we talk about cholesterol synthesis. How do we build this? And we start with isoprenes, which I believe are 3 carbon units, but we take a whole bunch of those and start hooking them together, and we get all malonyl-CoA and all sorts of fun stuff in there. So we end up building our cholesterol, and we talk about how to regulate that as well. That's why our statin molecules, there's always a chance that you'll get like a statin question in there. I doubt it. I think I redesigned my exam to kind of not talk about too many crazy examples. But that's one of the things I want to do is I'll put in, things that we don't talk about in class that use the concepts that are in there. Although this exam is much more straightforward. Okay? When we get to the next exam, the DNA technology, it's like, how would you do this? Or how do you set up PCR or something like that? You'll see more of those. Yeah. See, this is a nice room, isn't it? It's clean, it's bright. We got multiple TVs in here, everything. The only thing we lack is a pointer. Okay, and it's warm. Okay. All right, but this is pretty much it for this quiz. And like I say, I've got this posted and accessible in the module, exam 3 module on Canvas. So if you've got questions about this, let me know. But this is our very straightforward part. After this, I might ask some more detailed question. But let me go ahead and pull up the study guide. Okay, oops, come back. Okay, all right, let's blow this up a little bit. Okay, I suppose I could actually do this. There we go, look at that, check it out. All right, woo, let's not get too crazy. All right, make sure that's nice and visible in there. Okay, so this study guide, I tried to put in everything that I might talk about in there. Let me check to make sure. Yeah, but because there's really, we're gonna have to do this, aren't we? This thing with the trackpad. Fingers and crazy stuff happens, man. But there's really not a whole lot in these chapters, unlike the enzymes and proteins chapters, right? So, we'll talk about things, like why do we call them carbohydrates? How are they made? What are they used for? General roles that they play out. So we can talk about a lot of energy storage, a lot of signaling, cell-cell communication, pattern recognition, all that fun stuff in there. But mainly we'll talk about energy in here, especially in chapter 7. We'll see long chains. One of the big differences between our carbohydrates and our proteins, and we'll see our nucleic acids. We can have branch chains here. Yeah.
So with the definitions of the enantiomers, diasomers, and epimers, so is it going to be like a question where you give us a structure of maybe one of the carbohydrates, and you're going to have other structure, like have the answer choices and choose which one is maybe the enantiomer?
Yes, I may do something like that. So I may give you a terminology and then like list, those things there and say what term is this defining? I might do it the other way. What's a say what's a diastereomer, and then have like all the definitions for diastereomer or enantiomer or something like that. Or I may have, I may have to, But I try not to do too much of that in there. But it is a little bit of organic. It's a lot like the organic that's in there. But there's only a little bit of that. Now the epimers are maybe more interesting, because now you have your, say, like, I know there's that slide in chapter 7 where you have the hexoses, and you've got glucose in the middle, and mannose is an epimer of glucose because it differs by 1 chiral center, and galactose is an epimer of glucose because it differs by 1 different chiral center. But mannose and galactose are not epimers because they have 2 chiral centers that are different from each other. So our epimers are just that one difference in there, 1 step removed. Okay. defining aldoses and ketoses. So just know your aldehyde form versus your ketone form. You might see fructose in there because fructose is our ketone form of hexose that we normally see, our ketone form of glucose, I want to say, but that's maybe not the best way to say it. And the neat thing about our ketoses is we tend to have one fewer chiral center in there. So we don't have as many ketoses for a number of carbon chains as we do our aldoses. Same way like hexose, pentose, all that good fun stuff in there too. You may have a bunch of structures and say, hey, which one of these is mannose? Which one of these is glucose? So the big thing that I used to do when, in class exams, right? Draw me the linear structure of glucose. Draw me the ring structure of glucose. Or talk about the anomeric carbon, so that when our glucose is in its linear form and it can circularize, you have that anomeric carbon, which can be alpha or beta, depending on the chirality that you get there. So it's probably a good idea to maybe kind of draw that. Be comfortable saying, oh, okay, if it's above the plane, it's alpha. If it's below the plane, beta something. Across the plane, maybe, I forget my mnemonic that I used there. I need to see the pictures to refresh my memory. But, or flashcards, I think would work as well too. Sometimes Quizlet, you can make nice flashcards out of Quizlet in there. Okay. Some various definitions. Look at our hemiacetals and our hemiketols versus our ketols and our acetals. It basically has to do with the oxidation state. So if we do like a partial oxidation, we get the hemi form. If we do a full oxidation, we get the acetal or ketol form there. I think a good study practice would be able to draw them. I'm not going to ask you guys to draw them, but I may have pictures up there and say, yeah, which form is this? Which we identify maybe which is the anomeric carbon, which is the carbon 4, carbon whatever in there. You gotta use the what? All right, that's actually not my wife interrupting me during class, but Dr. Keith. Yeah. Can I teach you how to use the turf? No. It's like someone really needs it. I need to do it to learn how to do it myself. I can teach you how to use the other stuff in there, but yeah. All right, anyway, more definitions, lots and lots of definitions in there. Just our pyranose and furanose rings, 5-membered or 6-membered rings that contain an oxygen. And that's what happens when our glucose circularizes. We have one carbon that's kind of hanging out there as an offshoot of the ring, and the oxygen from carbon 6 usually, carbon 6, carbon 2, maybe, makes becomes part of the ring. Okay. I think pretty much everything is in our D form, D-glucose. I doubt I'll have you draw, identify anything in the L form or anything crazy like that. But I might ask a question, about this thing. Why is it in D? Well, not why is it in the D form? Because God made it that way. Okay, it's a terrible answer, but that'd probably be the best answer for that. Cyclic form, modified versions in there. Yeah, not too much in there. You'll definitely see some questions about glycosidic bonds. So when we take our individual, say, I'll probably only use hexoses because that's when we talk about our glycogen, amylose, amylopectin, and cellulose. It's all glucose. And it's just how we hook them together, and then how frequently those branch points are, what all we see going on in there too. So, and being able to identify an alpha 1,4 linkage as opposed to a beta 1,4 linkage. The other thing might too is like, well, what if we do an alpha 1,6 linkage or an alpha 1,3 linkage? Could we do that? Yeah, we can do that, and you see that. And actually, there's a really kind of neat thing that we'll see when we talk about our nucleic acids, because they have ribose in there, right? We can actually get a phosphate that's a 2,3 phospholinkage. We can make another ring off of the ribose ring with a phosphate group in there. So, which is definitely why RNA is far more unstable than DNA, because DNA lacks that 2' hydroxyl group, so it kills its reactivity. But that's getting ahead of stuff. So if you can talk about the glycosidic bond, identify those linkages. In the past, what I've said is, hey, pick 2 sugars and draw them in an alpha 1,4 linkage, or a beta 1,4 linkage, or a beta 1,6 linkage, or a beta 1. So it's really being able to, identify the carbons in the group and how they connect together, and whether you have that little squiggly part there, or if you have the Z form, Z drawing in there. Our conceit to how we draw. If we go back to chapter 7, there's pictures of cellulose versus glycogen to see the alpha versus beta linkage, the way we draw them, how they're hooked together. Okay. For glycoproteins, I'm not going to go into a whole lot there about that, mainly being able to talk about O-linked versus N-linked. Give an example now. I'll probably really just say, what's it mean if it's O-linked? Well, it's attached to an oxygen, so it's probably a serine or a threonine in there. It's an N-link. We're probably looking at a lysine or an arginine for the attachment site of the glycoprotein. It's actually funny. I was going to write a question. It's like, which of the following is not a type of biomolecule? And I was going to have so when you have our lipoproteins, right? We talked about those, and here we have glycoproteins, and we have glycolipids. So I was going to say, what about a lipoglycan? Turns out there actually are lipoglycans. We don't talk about them because they're only found in bacterial cells, but it's kind of like, which are we attaching the sugar to the protein or the protein to the sugar, as to whether we call it a proteoglycan or a glycoprotein. So I kind of got rid of that question, even though we don't talk about lipoglycans. Which always makes me think of Underworld, because it's like, oh, we gotta fight the lichens, right? Yeah, because biochemistry is like a vampire; it sucks the energy out of it. Okay, failed stand-up comedian here. All right, so feel free to stop or interrupt if you have questions about this. But again, I like the study guide because it gives you a lot to write about. A lot, you can space it out and draw structures in there, or put in your own notes or stuff like that. So depending on how you want to set up your study. When we get to chapter 10, because it's only chapter 7, chapter 10, only 2 chapters, and they're pretty straightforward and not too long, so that's good. Just like we have the various functions of carbohydrates, I want you to know the functions of lipids, and there's a whole. I'm probably not gonna ask you guys about like buoyancy or anything crazy like that, but it's a good idea to know a fair number of what all lipids can do, and and I tend to think of lipids. Because I drink too much Mountain Dew here. Oh, look, I'm storing energy. Look at all this potential energy I have. But our signaling molecules and all the other roles that they can play as well too. Our steroid-derived hormones and all that fun stuff in here. General structure, just kind of like that quiz in there. General structure. Saturated versus unsaturated. Difference between cis and trans double bonds. Keep in mind our cis double bonds are going to introduce a kink in that fatty acid, so they can't pack together as well. Whereas our trans will still have a double bond there, but it'll still be this extended linear chain form. So that means if we had a bunch of trans bonds, they could pack together just like a bunch of saturated acids. I may ask you a question, what does that mean in terms of melting point? So if you have a bunch of saturated fatty acids, they can pack together much more closely. You'll need a higher, they'll have a higher melting point because it'll take more energy to break them apart. Whereas you have a bunch of ones that have kinks in them, they don't fit together as nicely, so their melting point will be lower. So that might be that explain why. I know a couple of the questions, actually for the most part, most people when I had justify your answer or explain this on exam 2, most people gave me some answers in there. There are a few people who gave me an answer, but they didn't do any justification. It's like, I'd use this. And I was like, well, it's technically correct, but why is that correct? So that's what we're shooting for.
Higher melting point because it's more compacted with the
Yes, yeah, they can, basically those long linear chains can pack closer together.
And then unsaturated is lower because it's more strong.
Right, because you have those double bonds in there, and you just can't fit them together. It's kind of like, so did you guys know that there were square tomatoes at one point at the supermarket? Yeah. So farmers came up with a way, some genetics to make square tomatoes so that you could pack them and ship them, because you can't pack round tomatoes. You have all this wasted space, right? So if you can pack square tomatoes, then you can pack more of them and get them to the market and sell them. The only trouble is they didn't taste very good. So.
I thought square tomatoes would be cute.
Yeah. So it's really convenient. You can slice them, fit them on the bread. It's great, but they tasted like crap. So nobody would buy them, and that's why if you ever go to the grocery store and you notice like heirloom tomatoes are always like an extra 150% of the price of regular tomatoes because they're like small batch. They tend to taste better, right? Because a lot of what was done was to get things to market, and so we'll pick like the easiest tomato to work with, even though it's not the tastiest tomato. If you look at Roma tomatoes, you will find Roma tomatoes in like every grocery store because they're really easy to grow, really easy to work with, and people put them in sauces because you don't want to slice those and put those on your bread. So anyway, it's just an example of multiple things to keep track of. But yeah, you could pack square tomatoes really easily, so you can pack saturated fatty acids really easily. Probably not pick tomatoes as my example there too. I think somebody tried to make square watermelons at one point too. Pack those. Still remember the highlight of one of my beach trips as a kid. So we used to drive from West Virginia to the Outer Banks, and really early in the morning, and there was a watermelon truck. There's this bump, railroad track that is really bad crossing, and we always used to hit it when we were kids, sleeping, and the suitcases would hit us in the head or something like that. Like, oh, slow down. But anyway, a watermelon truck hit that crossing at too high of a speed and crashed, turned over. And the thing is, you spill all the produce out there, you can't gather it up and sell it. So they're like, yeah, anybody, you guys? So we had like a car full of watermelons to take to the beach with. It's like the best beach trip ever. He's like, watermelon every day. It's awesome. So yeah, that's what I remember as a kid. Yeah, I don't remember actually playing in the sand or anything. I was like, yeah, I remember when the truck crashed and we got free watermelons. So anyway, but they were round, not square, so we couldn't pack them in the car. It's a hatchback, so they would actually fit. Anyway. Never mind. Getting way off track, right? But yeah, there'll definitely be a question, almost certainly about the packing or the melting point or something like that in there too. Yeah. Again, we can see that cis and trans in there. I actually kind of like the question that I think I have on there. We saw our structure of triacylglycerols. We saw the structures of glycerophospholipids. I didn't go over the sphingolipids, but you may have that as well in there too. A great essay question would be compare and contrast glycerophospholipids and sphingolipids. And I could break that down into 4 little topics in there. You could say, well, you got your glycerol with your saturated fatty acid, your unsaturated fatty acid, both with ester linkages in your phosphate head group. Your sphingolipid looks like this. It has its own fatty acid tail, and then you have that amide linkage in the center portion. So you can break that probably like 3 to 4 points in there too, but you'd want to cover all of those. I know one of the questions I asked, I think it was the NMR or X-ray crystallography question. It's like a lot of people got like 5 out of 6 on there too, because we got a lot of stuff in here, but there are very few people that put all the points together. Yeah. Because it was so big that it would overwhelm the NMR, and you would get so many. You wouldn't be able to resolve all the peaks in there too. Now some people have said, well, it's very pure, and you need a pure substance for NMR, so that's a rationale for why you could do that. But a better choice would probably be the X-ray. Somebody asked, well, if we can crystallize it, I was like, I didn't really talk about that, but yeah, that's the key, because it's hard. It can be hard to crystallize things. That's why.
It could have been Aaron Ashburn to support it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. But if you chose NMR, you'd have to have really good support, and it would be hard. Yeah.
That it was a pure compound.
Yeah.
You just didn't know anything about it.
Yeah. Other than its size, which was massive. Yeah. So there's all sorts of ways you can write it, and that's what I like to sometimes give questions, and it's not so much because these 2 chapters really tend to be very straightforward. But when we talk about the nucleic acids, especially chapter 9, talks about the technology in there, I can say, well, how would you do this? Or one of the things I used to like ask in lab, I think I might have asked this on the first test too. I can't remember. Was give you actually there's a really detailed question I used to ask in the lab for about proteins. I'd give all these details, all this stuff you know about a protein, and say, how would you purify this protein? And there was enough detail in there that you could choose an affinity column or an ion exchange column or size exclusion, but you just have to explain why whichever method you chose would work. So I like to give you guys options. Also makes it harder to Google my questions, but you know, where? All right. Okay. So sphingolipids in there. Sterols and cholesterol, again, our general structure and the general roles that they play in there. But the big thing is, you know, what happens if we change some stuff? So my thought questions are going to be generally, hey, you know, suppose, you know, kind of like that. Suppose there's a mutation. You know, was it my mute E that wouldn't let the substrate bind in the last test, and the competitive inhibitor, because it binds the substrate, won't bind. Just about everybody did pretty well with that one. You know, the uncompetitive inhibitor binds at an allosteric site someplace else, so it would probably still bind as well. You couldn't say definitely, but probably. All right. But this is, you know, like I say, the study guide, so that's what we have. It's short. It's only 1 page, right? So, oh no, it's 2 pages. That's because I spelled everything out. Just feels short to me because there's not a whole lot of, so explain, oh yeah, there's not a lot of huge amount of detail I'm going to have you guys go into to explain stuff, unlike the previous exam where there's just so much. So I think this will be easier to study for, easier to prepare for, and like I say, usually there's about a 20-point swing in the average. Yeah. Exactly, because, you know, like I say, exam 2 is usually somewhere in the 60s, and exam 3 is usually somewhere in the 80s. But if you're one of the people who did well in exam 2, don't get cocky, you know, because there's always like 1 or 2 people who will do well in exam 2, and it's, oh, exam 3 is going to be so much easier. So, you know, just because I hate to say an exam is easy or hard, but I will say much more straightforward, much less material. So I think it's simpler to prepare for. Yeah. And it's just, you know, I think one of the other things too is as a protein biochemist, I can get crazy about my protein questions in there. And then, you know, when you get further, this is much more straightforward. And, you know, carbohydrates are probably one of the things that we talk the least about, other than, you know, dietary or some of that signaling, you know, like the blood typing example that's in there. But, you know, if you want to go in-depth and ask an in-depth question in there, you got to get really specialized, and it can get really hairy really fast. So, you know, whereas, you know, our proteins, it's just a nice little slippery slope of, oh, well, we can go here. Oh, we can, like an onion, you can keep peeling back layers and ask more and more questions. A lot fewer layers to this. Okay. Let's see. Oh my Lord, that was fast. The other thing I wanted to today. So let me pause and see if there's any questions. No, not in the meeting. Going crazy here. Did I end the meeting? No, I did not. Okay, good. Do not end the meeting. Let me pause and see if there are any questions. Okay. Yeah, it was from the earlier about the running out of time, so on the exam. So yeah. Yep. So like I say, I don't think there will be that issue with this one, because there are not as many short answer / essay questions in it, and I think there are a fair number of questions. There might be a lot more multiple choice, but it's fewer total questions. No, I think there might be one that's like choose all that apply, but almost all of them are. Yeah. I'll say that's yeah. I don't like those because of the way that the software tends to grade those. My son got this experience too with his. He had a 16-part question in there that you had to, you know, match up all 16 of these little things in there. And so he got 15 out of 16 of them right, but he got 1 wrong, so it gave him 0 out of 16. He's like, ah, so he was terrified. So, you know, there's, you know, it's making the software a little bit smarter. Look, I'm short. Okay. Yeah.
We had that big table that had 16 numbers that one calculation, the whole question.
Okay.
And the thing is, he does it by hand, so you gotta know how to do it.
It took me forever to solve that question. If it was wrong, because if you calculate the x
Where did I put that?
X bar squared wrong for one of those 16. I mean, gonna mess up the entire rest of the time.
I feel like if you show the steps, even if you get the wrong answer, you should
There
at
we
least
go.
feel all of it. Because it could be a minor mistake, a calculator mistake. Exactly.
Okay. So what I want to pull up real quick, and I'm gonna post this online because this is a good. Let me share the screen here, right? Okay. I have this. It's a fun study guide. I use this in an intro course in here, talking about skin color and melanin content and why did it develop the way it did. And this ties in with our vitamin D, right? So what happens if you get too much sun exposure? You can develop skin cancer, right? Okay. But at what age do most people get skin cancer? Yeah, or even older, so 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, so you'll see a lot of people who are older, it's rare. You will find people in their teens and 20s who will develop skin cancer, but mostly people are going to be 30 or 40 or older, okay? When do people have kids? If you go back in time, when kids are younger, in their teens and 20s usually, no, we're all now in our 30s and 40s, but if you go back evolutionarily, you would have kids younger. So the evolution of skin color really doesn't have anything to do with preventing skin cancer, because evolutionarily it doesn't matter. Once you have your kids, go ahead and get cancer. You've reproduced and passed on your genes. That's the important part. So this little study, it's actually like a 4 or 5 part study in here that goes into it, talking about pigmentation and UV light and the protective effects of melanin versus UV light. So people who evolved in an equatorial area tend to have darker skin, more melanin there as a protective measure against UV light. But what all is that UV light doing? So it's more than just the skin cancer in here. And there's also a balance because we have to look at the vitamin D. So our melanin is kind of our natural sunscreen. It's funny, I noticed this because with my kids, we go out and to the pool or something like that. I got to make sure I put on the sunscreen because I will burn like crazy. My kids have a bit more melanin content, so it's like, yeah, sure, we'll put some sunscreen on the kids, but they just get darker. They don't tend to burn very much. So I can be a more lax parent with them. I can be a lazy parent. Shh, don't tell my wife. Oh no, she's going to see this video. All right, that's bonus points for no. Okay. But we can kind of look at this, our UV radiation across the Earth. And again, we see that, in the equatorial region, we tend to have a lot more UV radiation. It's always interesting to me as well, too, because if you got to think our Earth is on the axis, so why we have our seasons here in our climates, because we've got this tilt, so now we're going to have less sunlight. Having been in equatorial nations, the craziest thing for me, it's like, oh, it's like summertime, it's the beach, and it gets dark at 7 p.m. It gets light at 7 p.m., but there's a 12-hour distribution because you're right at the equator, so that's all the time, all year round. So it's just warmer. But anyway, our UV index, there's a lot more UV light when the sun is out. So we can see our latitude, our distribution of skin tones in there. You get your equatorial evolved people versus your more northern climates or Scandinavians and Aral and Caucasus mountain people in there too. But we can talk about that reflectance in there too. So basically, so we need our UV light for our vitamin D formation, but what are we protecting against? Why can't we just make lots of UV light? And this is where we get into our folate, our vitamin D, in part 5 in here. I won't go through this, but there are a bunch of questions here. This might be a fun little kind of break from studying. It kind of ties in with, again, our vitamin D we see as a steroid-derived vitamin. So look at similarities in there. But I'll probably, make some allusions online to this and ask you guys some questions about this. I will make sure this will not go on the exam, but I'll leave this up here for you guys to read through and kind of think about. And then depending on how the exam goes, maybe I'll throw in some questions. Maybe I'll make this an assignment, extra points, not bonus points, but extra points. We'll just see how things go there. And then we can talk about this maybe next Thursday. Maybe not. Maybe not. We'll see. We'll see what I'll have to look at the calendar and see what my time frame is looking like here. But I have answers to all these questions as well too, so we can kind of discuss that. But it does become interesting to think about, yeah, because I think I mentioned vitamin D, something like greater than 90% of the world's population is vitamin D deficient because we all spend so much time indoors now. Like most middle-aged women I know have, can easily get a prescription for vitamin D, and often you'll see this, especially women who are like in their 30s or older, any type of high-risk pregnancy, that'll be one of the prenatal vitamins. So we'll just go ahead and throw in some vitamin D in there. And the kind of key is we're talking about that folate. Folate becomes the most important prenatal vitamin because that's involved in neural crest formation for the fetus. And, gotta make sure you have your folate, or else got a baby without a brain. No, okay. Then they grow up to be a politician. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Don't want to say anything about that. There, but I'll make this available on there. I keep forgetting because I've hidden all my study guides in a different folder. I should use them more in biochem because but I used them in an introductory science course that I developed in there. And, some of them are fun, some of them are really simple, but this one is a pretty detailed one, so it's fun. All right. Goodness, 45 minutes. Yeah, we're just flying along here. You guys want to start chapter 8? No. All right. Questions about anything there for the upcoming exam? Like I say, I'm pretty sure it's fairly straightforward. Let me do something here. I want to check. Let me check my exam real fast, and because I made this up already. Yeah, I'm ahead of the game here. That's what happens when you don't have to grade lab reports every week. Yes, I'm loving Labster. I'm thinking we ought to use Labster all the time. All right, but let me take a quick look at this.
Does it save your progress?
Yeah, yes, it will save your progress. Yeah. Oops, where are we?
I sent my transfer bill. I'm getting scared.
Okay, I kind of lied to you guys a little bit. Turns out there are about 10 short answer questions, but yeah, 13 or so. Yeah. However, as opposed to like more than half the questions on the last exam were like 6 points or so. All of these are 4 points except for one. 2. Yeah, because I need to make up some points in here somewhere, right? What's my total point? My point total up here. I think I'll make this another 2. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. There's a couple built in. I figured I did an easier way of doing my extra points in here. So there's really like a couple questions that are worth more than 4 points, but they're all, except for one, listed at 4 points, and then you can just get some extra points in there if you answer them very thoroughly. So, but about a little fewer than 20 multiple choice questions and about 10 short answer questions, and of those 10 short answer questions, 8 or 9 of them are like 2 sentences. And then the other 2 are going to be where you spend some time, but they're not that bad. Okay. All right, so let me get back out of here. Okay. Anybody online have any questions? Okay. So I think this one will be a lot easier. So I will go ahead and stop recording here.